Welcome to another episode of Strange Darkness Radio, and I'm your host, Bobby Washington, along with
Carolyn Gray.
Amy Tiedemann.
Thank you, ladies, for joining us on tonight's show. Tonight's show, we have a very, very special guest. And we normally do a lot of hullabaloo about what we've been doing and everything else, but not tonight. Tonight, we have a very special guest, the master of paranormal podcasting, the standard of paranormal podcasting or podcasting in general, let alone hosting, Mr. Jim Harold. Thank you, sir, for joining us on tonight's show. We do have an intro for you. I'm going to go ahead and play it before you say anything, just because it's ready to go. But then after that, you can have at it. And here we go.
Welcome, listeners, to another spine-tingling episode of Strange Darkness Radio. I'm your spectral voice, Benson, and I want to personally welcome you to tonight's show. We have a very special guest, a true legend in the world of paranormal podcasting, the father of it all, Jim Harold. Jim Harold is the host of the immensely popular Jim Harold's Campfire and the Paranormal podcast, which have collectively been downloaded over 65 million times. He is also a best-selling author of the Campfire book series and the president of Jim Harold Media. In 2005, Jim launched the Paranormal podcast, which is the longest-running paranormal podcast on the internet. His most popular podcast, Jim Harold's Campfire, recently celebrated its 15th anniversary in 2024, marking a decade and a half of sharing eerie and extraordinary stories from everyday people. Jim has been a full-time podcaster since 2012, but his journey began long before that. He worked in broadcast radio for over a decade, including time spent at CBS Radio. His diverse career also spans technology, newspaper, and he has even taught at the university level. Jim has been featured on prominent platforms such as Coast to Coast AM and Beyond Belief with George Noory. In addition to his podcasts, Jim is the author of the best-selling Campfire Series, which compiles some of the most haunting paranormal stories shared on his Campfire podcast. His latest addition to the series, TrueGhost, Jim Harold's Campfire Volume 6, was released in May 2024. This new volume promises to deliver 65 chilling tales, including encounters with ghosts, doppelgangers, cryptid creatures, UFOs, and more. So sit back, relax, and prepare to be captivated by the master of paranormal storytelling himself. Welcome to Strange Darkness Radio, Jim Harold.
Thank you. I don't even know what to say. Wow, I'm blown away. That is so kind of you guys, Bobby, Amy, Carolyn. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. And what an introduction from Benson. I don't think I've ever had a better introduction.
Oh,
Definitely.
Bobby put a lot of work into that for you. He is a fan, and we are too.
Yes,
But Bobby's definitely your biggest fan.
Well,
Yeah.
Thank you, Bobby. I appreciate that. Is so kind. I couldn't ask for more. Thank you so much. And again, it's great to be here.
Oh, yes. No, definitely.
Thank you.
Like I said, I'm a longtime fan, been listening for over 14 years. It's just an honor, again, to have you on the show. And, just the whole thing, Jim, your whole story as far as going from the paranormal realm and branching off into all different podcasts. How did this all come about?
Well, years ago, 1912, now, a long time ago, I went to school for broadcasting, mainly television, not so much even radio. And I ended up working in radio, but I ended up working on the business side. And fast forward to 2005, I had been working on and off in radio for about a dozen years, and I realized I was never going to get behind the mic because, I'm married with two small kids at the time. They're not so small right now. And the thing is that it just turned out that I wasn't going to be able to go back to Paducah.
Yeah.
And start over and started a TV station or a radio station. But then I heard about this thing called podcasting. And I said, man, this is my chance to get behind the mic. This will just be a fun little hobby. So anyway, basically I did. It surprised me. It kind of took off over a number of years. And in 2012, I went to my wife and she graciously said, yeah, give it a try full time, which was, a big risk. And, it's worked out. And I've gotten to, when I decided to podcast, I thought, let's pick something that I really love. And my interest in the paranormal goes back to a show called In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. I was just a little kid watching it on TV. And ever since then, every time I would go to a library, a bookstore, whatever, I'd look for those paranormal books. There were never enough of them. And I just decided that was my topic. The only thing that's funny is I thought, man, I'll do this for 6 months. I'll talk to all these paranormal experts. I'll have it all figured out. No, I have more questions right now than I did when I started. So that's how I got here, and I'm just very blessed and thankful to our great audience, to my wife for being so supportive, my kids who now they do things in the business. Everybody kind of works in the business, and it's been great, and I still love talking about spooky stuff.
Yeah, that is so interesting because, even thinking that you wouldn't do it on from a radio show standpoint, because you have the voice, you have, you're charismatic, you have everything it takes, to host a show like Coast to Coast and all those types. And so, yeah, it's like I said, just thanks for doing what you're doing, because you've like spawned so many paranormal podcasts just from your show alone, that everyone is like, let me take a stab at it, or I want to tell a story, or I want to, do it from a different standpoint. So I definitely think that's incredible. Definitely.
Well, thank you. And the thing is I've had myself a lot of influences. You look at great people like the late great Art Bell. You look at people like the late Ian Punnett, who was a guest host on many years for Coast to Coast AM. And again, I go back to Leonard Nimoy. Most people think of him as Mr. Spock, and I love Star Trek, but I think of him as the guy that kind of engendered my love of the paranormal. Yeah. So, we all kind of, are influenced by different people. And if I could influence a few people along the line, that's great. Yeah. And glad to do it.
Nice. So you would say, as far as, being something that was pivotal in moving you into doing all of this, what would you say it was that made you go out of broadcasting and jump right into podcasting, which was extremely, I think there was only Apple or I think iTunes was the only people.
Yeah, actually, Apple had just added it to iTunes at the time.
Yeah.
Well, the reason was because I didn't have to ask permission. You had to knock on a lot of doors to get on the radio. And if I wanted to do the same show, they would have said, yeah, we'll do it. And it'll only cost you $500 a week. And we'll put you on Saturday morning at 7:30 a.m. and give you a half hour for the low price of $500 a week. Something like that. And the truth was, when I started, I wasn't prepared, but I just kind of worked through it. And I think the shows have gotten better over the years. But this was an outlet to do it. It was a hobby. I thought it was going to be a hobby. I didn't think it was going to be my job, because, and that's the thing that's kind of it's held firm, is the fact that even though now it's my job and has been for a dozen years, I still enjoy it. I'm still interested in the topics.
Yeah.
They still fascinate me just as much as before. And that's what makes me feel like I'm in the right place, that I can explore that. And I love the freedom that, hey, if I want to do a show this week on UFOs, I can do a show on UFOs. If I want to do a show next week on shadow people or ghosts, I can do that. I don't have to ask anybody's permission. I can sail my own ship, and it's kind of a nice way to do it.
Nice.
So, Jim, you had said that the Leonard Nimoy show In Search of was that's the main motivator for you for creating the Paranormal Focus radio show. Like, do I have that correct? Like,
I wouldn't say that. That's what kind of lit the fire, though, when I was a kid. That's what got me interested in to begin with, to start the Paranormal podcast. And it was funny because I started so early that I'm like, okay, I'm doing a podcast about the paranormal. What am I going to call it? Paranormal podcast, paranormal. I'll call it the Paranormal podcast. And I thought, oh, somebody's got that name. And they did not. That's how old I am. But anyway, the point is that I would say that set the initial interest. I mean, like when I was in elementary school. And then, I started reading books. I remember reading all the books about the Bermuda Triangle and about ghosts. And some people out there will remember that Time Life series of books. They would send you a book every month, and I'd always get those out of the library about different paranormal phenomena. And so that kind of lit the fire. By the time 2005 came around, I was already fascinated by all the topics. And of course, Coast to Coast AM was a great influence as well.
Nice. Carolyn, you have a question?
Yeah, just I guess since you first started doing your show versus today, has your approach changed? Has your show evolved? Like,
Sure.
Would you say that you've grown and you've learned? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, the thing for me is that when I started, I had like very specific thoughts on the supernatural and the paranormal. I thought, okay, ghosts are dead people, cryptids are animals, UFOs are piloted by aliens, very much like I thought I understood everything. And now, while some of those things I think are still true, I've kind of broadened my outlook where, for example, ghosts. Now, I do believe sometimes, for example, people who have passed over, they have visitations, they get in touch with people, they give them signs. I totally believe that's true. And so I think sometimes ghosts, for example, can be people who passed. But I never even considered things like time slips. And I've got a great time slip story I can share with you from the book, if you're interested in hearing it. The idea that maybe we're getting a glimpse at people from the past. We're just like looking through a window in time. Or the idea of residual hauntings where they're not actually obviously the sentient people who have passed, but we're seeing kind of an energetic replay. Now, another one is UFOs. Before, and I still believe that the UFO phenomenon is real. I think a certain percentage reflect something that is non-human. I do believe that. Some of them are military, I'm sure. Some people are just mistaken. Unfortunately, there's people who hoax. All that stuff exists, but I think there is a subset that definitely indicates something that's not human. But the question is it out there? Or could it be from here? I mean, just in the last week or two, there has been a lot of press about crypto-terrestrials or ultra-terrestrials. I think there were some researchers from Harvard who said, literally from Harvard, who said, this was in the news, this should be researched more. And the idea that maybe these beings come from the oceans or underground, which to me sounds like total science fiction. But again, who knows? So I guess, first of all, I am more convinced than ever that something's going on with these different phenomena. Yes. I'm less convinced of what it is. And the third thing I'll just say real quickly, people will say, well, what have you learned? And I'll say, I haven't learned a lot, but I have learned this. I think our existence and our universe is far more complicated, far weirder, far stranger than anything we can imagine. We had a guest, Jim Willis. He just passed away, unfortunately, recently. But on his Facebook page, he had a quote. And I don't know if it was his quote or somebody else.
Yeah.
But I love it. He says, "Not only is the universe stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine." And I think that says a lot.
Yes.
I think that's part of what makes this paranormal topic so incredibly fascinating, and because it never ends. There's no one answer. You can't quantify it. There are so many different variables, and every experience, every energy, every phenomena is as unique as anything else. It's like you can get so close to figuring it out, but you never quite know for sure. And there are so many possibilities and so many possible answers to all of it. It's so fascinating. But yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you so much.
No, yeah, amazing. So, really quick, on the whole spectral side of ghosts themselves, what do you think that is us coming back? Do you think it's demonic entities or something from, another universe or beyond the veil of something that's, kind of like going in between or in and out of our, space and time? Or, is it loved ones, reaching out?
Right. Well, this is going to sound like the biggest cop-out answer ever, but I kind of think it's a little bit of all of the above. I think definitely, I believe in, just today I was recording some calls for my Campfire podcast, and people were talking about signs from their loved ones. I believe that is a real thing. I do think that does happen. You talked about the idea of demons. I really do believe personally, I mean, everybody's entitled to their belief. I think there is good and evil in the world that we live in. I don't think there's a question about that. And I think in the paranormal world, it's kind of a reflection. In other words, I think it's a continuum. For example, on my podcast, Jim Harold's Campfire, I always say we have the whole continuum: good, bad, happy, sad. And some stories are very reassuring. And, Aunt Mildred came to see me and it was so peaceful. And then you have somebody else who has encountered something that sounds like it's truly evil. And I think sometimes folks get wrapped up into this. Some people think everything's a demon, which I do not believe.
Yeah.
So that's on one end of the spectrum. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have folks who think, oh, they're, my New Age friends, for example, who have some great wisdom, but sometimes they'll say, Jim, I don't believe there's anything evil. It's just a lower vibration. And that's certainly their right to believe, but I don't believe that. I believe there is truly good, there's truly evil, and the paranormal is a reflection of that, just like our daily lives. You see beautiful stories of how people help people, and then in this world, and then you see, unfortunately, people who kill people in cold blood for $5. Yeah. So I think the paranormal world's the same way. That's just my kind of thought process on it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Speaking of stories that you said you have stories on either ends of the spectrum on your show, like, do you ever have stories that are maybe just too intense or disturbing for your audience? And like, how do you handle that? Like, do you allow these kinds of stories on your podcast that might just be like a little bit too much?
I would say we probably air over 95% of stories that are submitted to us. I very rarely don't include a story unless it seems maybe somebody may have some kind of issue, or, once in a while people will try to pull a little trick here and there. I think I've had that a couple of times, but I could count it on one or two hands at the time that's happened over 15 years. I think most of the time people are sincere. Now, to your point, sometimes, we try to make the show general listening, so, almost anybody can listen to it. We don't allow a lot of cursing and things like that. Not because I'm a prude, but because I want everybody to be able to listen.
Exactly.
But the point being that if there is something I think is ultra disturbing, I might preface the story with, hey, if you've got kids listening, this may not be the story for them, or something like that. But generally, we don't edit stories. We don't not include stories. we pretty much have included pretty much everything over the years. Again, I would say well over 95% of the stories we get, we air.
Wow, that's incredible. And I love your interviewing technique because you will listen to the story, you will let them just, do their thing, tell their story, and you will, comment and on it and everything else. But yeah, you like create a safe space for people to come on and tell their story. Because I was going to come on your show probably, I don't know, maybe 13 years ago to tell my story and of what occurred with me growing up and made me go down this whole realm of the paranormal. And then I thought to myself, I was like, well, you know what? I'm gonna save that. I'm gonna have a show one day and I'm gonna save it, and I'm gonna be the first, thing I'm gonna tell on my show. And that's what I did. So it's just interesting, the things you put out in the universe. And again, to now have you on my show is just an incredible thing for me. And so I'm definitely like off my game tonight, just FYI. But
We all are. Yeah, we're all really nervous.
Oh, I don't know why. I mean, look, I tell people, hey, I'm a successful mid-tier podcaster. I'm not Joe Rogan or anything.
Oh, no,
I'm not like this mega podcaster.
You are. Who do you think?
Thank you.
Who do you think got this technique and skill and just the ease of these interviews? What do you think Joe was watching? Because Joe is really into the paranormal, and trust me, he's watched your show a bunch of times. Just FYI.
Well, thank you.
But
thank you.
I want to get into. I want to ask you about your book, but in going through it, I love the stories. They're incredible. They're just great stories, and you put a great collection of stories together. But I did have one that I really loved because I just love the whole theater of the mind for this particular story and what I believe it could possibly be. So what I did, because I'm a big AI guy, with Benson and a couple of other people that I have that do my AI. But I had a story voiced, and so I want to go ahead and play that for you and discuss this particular story that's in your book.
This is a story from Jim Harold's True Campfire Stories, Volume 6.
The Mysterious Mrs. Raspberry. It was the early 1980s, and we lived in a smallish town in Idaho. In the summertime, you'd get up in the morning, say goodbye to your mom, and be gone until dinner time. One day, my friend Connie and I decided to walk down the decommissioned railroad tracks about a block from my house. They ran all the way down to the lake, about 4 miles away. We packed a lunch and started walking all the way down the tracks. We were about 8 or 9 years old and ready for some adventure. It was densely forested once we got about a mile from our house. We were walking, and there was a big clearing. A couple of houses were there, and there was a big raspberry thicket by one of them. A lady was hanging her laundry up on the line. We stopped to talk to her. She was lovely and sweet. She asked us if we'd like some raspberries. So we took our shirts and made little baskets. You know how you hold them out and put things in them to hold? We put the berries in our shirts and kept on toward the lake. We made it and stayed most of the day. Finally, we decided to head back home and started walking back in the same direction. We completely retraced our steps from earlier in the day. We walked all the way to my house and never passed that house again. There was no house, there was no clearing, there was nothing, just railroad tracks. They only go one way. It's not like we took a wrong turn. We knew we'd met the kind lady with the berries. It was not our imagination because we had raspberry stains all over our shirts to prove it. The woman was a substantial older lady, and gals of a certain age often wore a snap-up house dress back in the day. She was wearing one of those. It would be odd to us now, but it was common back then. She was a substantial, kind lady. There wasn't anything strange about the interaction. She was friendly, the way people are to little kids. I had an opportunity about a year ago to talk to my friend who was with me that day, and she remembers the event exactly as I do. We're both still scratching our heads. Not too long afterward, I talked to my grandma, who believed in all things strange and weird about what happened. She said there had been houses in that area before the railroad tracks were built. That would have put it around the 1920s or so. I've walked those railroad tracks since then, thinking, well, maybe. But nothing like that has ever happened again. Story by Jennifer, Idaho.
Thank you, Jim Harold, for such an amazing collection of true stories. So please go out and get Jim Harold's True Ghost Stories, Volume 6.
We've heard you talk about this story before on other podcasts you've done and episodes you've been in, but can you just tell us maybe again for our audience what, in your opinion, what happened in this story?
Well, first of all, I thought that was really interesting. You picked that out as one of your favorites because it probably is my favorite in the book. And you'll notice it's not a super scary one, yes, but it's like a Twilight Zone-y kind of like that leaves you scratching your head. And I just think, you know, as I've said on other shows, I think there are two possibilities. One is that Jennifer's just making it up, which I don't believe. There's no benefit for her to make this story up, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. You know, she's just going on a podcasting, telling a story. There's no real upside to that. And she seemed very, very sincere to me, so I do believe her. And the other explanation is that she experienced something what we would call, the best phrase we have to describe it now, is paranormal or supernatural. It might be science, but the science of the 24th century. Mm-hmm. But I think she almost literally walked back in time and walked back out. And we've had other stories like this too. Mm-hmm. And I think if the situation is just right, that sometimes we can encounter and interact with the past. And to me, that's interesting because you asked about ghosts earlier. And there are accounts that we have heard where a person will see a ghost and the ghost will see them and they seem just as shocked by the person seeing the ghost.
Like they're the ghost. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. So that's why you say are ghosts dead people. I think in some cases they are and can be, but sometimes I think there's this time slip component, which is just as fascinating.
Yeah, I actually pulled that story because a scenario like that happened to me. When I was going through the book and reading the stories, that gravitated towards a situation that occurred with me. And I did, you know, I was listening to Jimmy Church today, and I did, you know, hear you tell that story. I was like, that is so funny because I already voiced that particular one. So that's incredible that you were telling that one when I, you know, already had voiced this one. And because this was probably around 20 years ago, I was going to a video store. I think it was Blockbusters or something. Me and my friend were going to get a scary movie. And so as we drove back home, there's this long street and it was really dark. It was foggy. And off to the left, there was a lady. She was white. She had all white hair. She was probably in her 80s, really frail, but she had on a gown that was something out of like Little House on the Prairie, you know. And I was all like, "What?" We're looking at her. We're like, "What is happening?" And she's like moving, like she was feeling her way as she was walking. It was the weirdest thing. We're like, "Okay, it's foggy, but it's not that foggy. Like, is this someone who's having an issue or having a moment or
she was in a time slip?"
Yeah, I'm not sure. And so we're two African-American guys, and we're like, okay, we're either going to call 911 or let's go to the house and get the girls and come back and, you know, try to find this, you know, see where this lady, you know, needs to be or what's happening with her. And she wasn't in the street. Well, actually, she was in the street. But any cars coming up would have seen her, and we were the only car in the area at the time. And we lived pretty much around the corner. And I've never seen it before. And again, long flowing white hair. It was in like a bun at the end. It was just really odd. Just the things that she had on seemed like she was out of time. And so we got home really quick. We told the girls, "Oh, you need to come back. There's some lady or whatever. We need to see if she's okay. We need to see if she's lost or, you know, whatever." We searched that whole area probably for an hour and could not find this lady at all. So again, could somebody, a relative have, you know, came and got her? Could she have made her way back home? we're not sure, but it just, you know, and ever since we're always, we think when we talk about me and my friend, we're like, dang, we should have really asked her, like, hey, are you okay? We should have, got more information or at least talk to the lady opposed to just running back and getting some people to help us out. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. And so I am
That's crazy.
really, I really focus on those type of time slip scenarios because again, who's to say what it is? Is it a time slip? Is it something to where they're walking through time, as they are going on this voyage? So because again, they're seeing all this area of houses, correct? It wasn't just the lady herself, it was the area was different, right?
Right.
It's almost like, oh, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, it's almost like the 2 points in time are somehow brought together and they're sharing the same space, but it's two completely different points in time. And I've read and I've heard other people who have experienced similar things. And it's like you said, Jim, the raspberry story. I mean, she could have been making it up, but there
Why?
are so many different people. Why? And also, there are so many other people who've had similar experiences that it starts to become a thing where you can't just brush it off as, oh, she made it up. It's something that has happened before to other people.
Yeah.
And
It's always interesting and it's like you hear stories where it's more than one person. Like I think there's like a really famous story in England about different shoppers on the same street. And they saw like what looked like to be 1950s cars and a store and people walking around. So it wasn't just like one person, it was like more than one person. So like, how do you explain when there's more than one person involved in that kind of situation?
Exactly. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go, please.
No, you said you read something. Go ahead.
I read a story. It was this woman who wrote a book, and she's an amazing author. I wish I could remember the name. I could never actually find this book again. I'm still looking for it, but it was an amazing book. And she had at one point in time owned a house that had previously been owned by Nikola Tesla. And she was having a party one night, and she said about 6 of her party guests had come up to her and told her that they had seen a man wearing period clothes, not from that time, who had, a sullen expression, and he was just kind of sitting there, like not really joining the party. And and separately, they didn't know each other, but they had come up and described Nikola Tesla to a T to her. And they all were kind of freaked out about it. Like, he didn't look like he belonged. He didn't look like he was interacting with anybody, but they had all seen him at the same time and not known that each other had seen him. So I just thought that was a cool story.
Yeah. It is. And I want to tell you one other quick story that's not in the book. Actually, this will probably be in a future book, but it's kind of a time slip / doppelganger situation. So this was a woman who actually, from Ohio, like me, worked in a large hospital. I think she was a respiratory therapist or something. So anyway, one day she's doing her job and she has to take a patient downstairs for some kind of test. So they have a transport person who moves the big hospital bed, and she's with him, and they wheel the patient into the big freight elevator, right? So it's her, it's the transport guy, and it's the patient in a hospital bed. So she looks, as she gets into the freight elevator, and she looks up and she sees a young woman getting into the other elevator across the way, like a passenger elevator, getting into the elevator with a group of people. But the woman is facing away from her, and she looks very familiar to her. And then the woman turns around, and the therapist realizes she's looking at herself.
Wow.
Opposite of her.
From behind.
Well, the woman turned around and then she realized I'm looking face to face across the hallway here at myself with this group of people. So anyway, the doors close on both sides. The woman goes and does what she has to do with the patient, but this bugs her all day long. She can't figure it out. But, when you're on the clock, when you're a professional, you've got a job to do. It's in the back of your mind, but you still got to do your job. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, it had been a particularly exhausting day. And she had this weird thing that happened that was bothering her. And she was waiting to get on the elevator with a group of friends, a group of other people there. So, and this is the passenger elevator. She gets on the elevator. She's kind of tired. She looks up and she sees the other elevator, the freight elevator across the way, which has a hospital bed, a transport person, and her.
And her.
Hmm.
Oh my god.
Dun, dun, dun.
That's creepy.
Wow. That is creepy.
Is that a doppelganger time slip? I don't know what it is, but
Right.
again, that's why I think, you look at something like time. Scientists are saying, we think time is linear. We perceive it that way. I mean, to me, it seems very, I had dinner with my family and then I got ready and we had this podcast, and it's very linear, but maybe all those things were happening at the same time. I mean, I don't really think we understand the nature of time. And it's a real mind bender. You can really kind of put your mind in pretzels if you think about this stuff long.
Yeah,
That's so
So-
true.
Jim, speaking of, so going back to your book, I was wondering, is there, so we know that Miss Raspberry was one of your favorite stories from the book, but is there like maybe one of the creepiest ones that you wanted to share, or maybe like a teaser of that, or maybe even from your previous books, like just like the one creepiest story that you've heard throughout your career?
Well, the creepiest story I've ever heard is called The Roadhouse Saloon. And I know Bobby's a big listener, so I'm sure he's heard the Roadhouse Saloon story before. And it is the creepiest in a non-traditional sense. And I've probably told this story a couple hundred times. So hopefully you'll find it interesting. So our caller's name was T.I. She was from Michigan, but in this particular case, she was visiting like a campground that she would go to every summer with her family up in Wisconsin. And her and one of her friends at the camp, his name was Bob, they decided they wanted to go see a band about an hour away from the campground. So they go to this bar and they see this band, and it was great. And they actually stayed even after closing time, went backstage, talked to the band because Bob and T.I. were musicians. So anyway, they're headed back to the campground. It's about 3:00 in the morning. It is a rural road, 2 lanes, very kind of spooky. If you've ever been in a rural country area at nighttime, when it's dark, it's dark. It's not like city dark. It is, there's no light whatsoever. So anyway, about 10 minutes into the our trip back to the campground, T.I. says to Bob, hey, I got to go to the restroom. And he says, well, you better pull up a tree because there's not much out here. And she said, that's okay. Just drive fast. So anyway, they go down a little bit and they come upon this bar. And it's like set off to itself. There's a parking lot. It's full of cars. It's well lit. You can hear the music. It's like thump, thump, thump. But the music is like, wait a minute. It's like 3:30 in the morning. This should not legally be open. But they say, you know what? I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth. I am going to go ahead and be a part of it. We're going to go in, and T.I.'s going to go to the restroom. So they go in. T.I. goes to the restroom. Bob gets a couple of soft drinks or whatever from the bar. And T.I. comes back. They're sitting there and they're talking. And Bob said, actually, I'm glad we stopped here. There's this huge wall-sized mural of like the Old West. And I'd always heard about this, and I always wanted to see it. And, it's like a bar room scene from a saloon. There's a bar and there's different people in it, a cowboy and, those kind of things. And they kept talking, and they realized this place was kind of weird. The people were kind of looking at him with blank stares, and they couldn't figure it out. And they started to look some more, and they noticed something else that was weird. Everybody in the painting was an actual customer. Like there was one guy standing there, and he's standing next to the bar. There's some guys playing pool in real life, and in the game they're playing cards. There's a woman who is dressed up like what they used to call the dance hall girl, and she's there. And she's in the painting, and she's there in real life, dressed normally, but still. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was kind of weird. But then they got to thinking about it, and they said, well, we understand the artist. These people are probably regulars, and the artist just incorporated them into the painting just as kind of like a tribute.
Yeah.
So anyway, they notice there's this big jukebox, this like classic bubbler tube jukebox with actual records on it, like a Wurlitzer, one of the classic ones, one real beautiful ones. And some guy goes and he puts on a song, Let's Twist Again by the oldies artist Chubby Checker. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the guy comes up to T.I., smiles real big. He has a mouthful of rotten teeth, and he says, "Want to dance?" And T.I. says, holds up her cane because she uses a cane. And she said, "No, I don't do much dancing." And T.I. said she was really glad she had that cane. So anyway, it goes on, and they keep talking and so forth. And they're looking at the painting again. And they noticed something they didn't notice before. There were these double doors, like the ones in the old Western movies where the guy would come in and say, "I want to see the sheriff. I want to show down," that kind of thing. Yeah. But they noticed something they didn't notice at the beginning. There seemed to be like two misty columns in the doorway. One was taller and one was shorter. And you thought, "Oh, that's weird. We didn't notice it." They talk a little more, and it seems to be like developing like a picture. And one seems to be a woman and the other seems to be a man. And no. They turn away, they look a little more, and they notice the woman has curly hair and Tia has curly hair. Then they notice the woman in the doorway has cowboy boots and Tia has cowboy boots. And then they notice there's a cane. The woman has a cane. At that point, Bob and T.I. see what's going on, and they're like, "Let's get out of here." So they stand up to go, and the people start motioning, "Come back, come back, come back." But they don't. They don't.
My God.
They close the door. The whole place goes stone cold, silent black, like it was never open. What? Neon signs out, no music, no nothing. They turn around and look at the parking lot where there had been plural cars. Now there's singular car, their car, and they leave. So, but the story's not over yet. So T.I.'s a lot braver than I am. I am like a chicken. I mean, I would never go back there again. No way. But T.I.'s made of stronger stuff. The next day or two, she goes back with either a friend or her sister. I can't remember. Mm-hmm. She does make one concession. She goes about 8 o'clock at night. She doesn't wait till 3 o'clock in the morning. She walks in. The mural is still there, the same, except there's nobody in the where the doors are. It's just the doors. Her and Bob aren't there. No misty figures. She walks over to the jukebox. Well, first thing she notices, it's not the same jukebox. It's a modern for the time jukebox with CDs, which is what you would have saw at that time when this happened. And then she looked for the Chubby Checker, Let's Twist Again song. No song, no Chubby Checker whatsoever on that jukebox. Mm-hmm. So then she goes to talk to the bartender. It's a young woman. And T.I. says, "Oh, I was in here the other night. There were a lot of people. And there was this big kind of strapping, good-looking bartender, kind of a farm boy, big muscles." And T.I., the bartender says, "Well, I'm sorry, but nobody by that description tends bar here. The only people that tend bar here are me and my elderly father." And with that, T.I. left. And for years, the answer was she never went back. But she eventually did go back to visit, just to visit. A couple of things. First of all, this place actually exists. I've had listeners who have gone there. The great cryptozoologist, researcher, author Chad Lewis took pictures, which I was later able to incorporate into a YouTube video on my YouTube channel. And then I felt so strongly about this story. I think she originally told us this in 2011 or 2012. I went up to Michigan and interviewed her in person. T.I.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
And T.I. was, I don't want to give away everything for, her personal reasons, but she was in a respected profession. I believe she's retired now. I visited with her and her husband for a couple hours at their home. I believe her more now than I did when she first told me the story. I was eyeball to eyeball. I totally believe this thing happened. Mm-hmm. And that is probably the most incredible story we've had over the course of the 15 years of the Campfire. And the cool thing about that is I also, as I said, we have a video version on my YouTube channel. Jim Harold is the YouTube channel. And we got to visit with her, and she kind of recounted it and added some additional details that weren't able to get to on the audio show.
Wow.
But that, to me, what was that?
That's like a Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah,
That
that's
is
amazing. I would not have left that if I saw a picture forming with me in it. I don't think I'd be able to leave.
Like,
That's
I belong here.
That's just fascinating.
I couldn't get out fast enough. I'd be let me out.
Amy would
I
be
want to go visit that place.
Vampire, one of the two.
I don't know. It may still be in existence. I mean, I've had people have sent me pictures. I've seen it online.
Well, I was going to ask, did you or anyone else do any research on the history of the bar? Like, did they know?
Well, I wanted to. I called them, and nobody would ever call me back. And I know that not only my shows featured it, but I had some contacts over at the Spooked podcast, and they would occasionally ask me for stories years back, and I kind of, told them about T.I., and they got in contact, and she was on their show too. So I know that the people at that place must know about my podcast and about this being featured, because it's been told many times. So, but I don't know what their attitude about it is. I should really check back and see if I think it might still be open. But I haven't. It's up in Wisconsin, and it's called the Roadside. It's the Roadside Saloon or Roadside Bar or something like that. Roadhouse, excuse me. I think it's still in existence. I can't say, but it did exist at the time. It was a real place. This is not a work of fiction.
Oh yeah,
Right.
I remember that story all those years ago, and it's an incredible story. It just goes, to the whole thing about what is going on. Like, what do you think that was? Do you think it was them entering into some alternate reality, or do you think it was the ghost of that place having them basically, possibly becoming ghosts? Or
what I'm wondering is, the scientists talk about the multiverse, the idea that there is, different existences of almost every permutation. And in another universe, Bobby, I'm interviewing you about your Campfire 6 book, whatever the case may be. I mean, just all different permutations, right? Yeah. So maybe she got like, it's like an old record where, the songs are in different bands. And if you hit the table, the arm jumps, I don't know.
Yeah.
And put her in another track. And that's the thing. It's so sometimes it's a little frustrating, because it's like, well, what does all this mean? Right. And I don't know that we're ever really going to get the answers. It's a lot of fun talking about, though.
So let me ask you this. Out of all the stories, out of podcasting for this length of time, have you ever had a paranormal experience or something you could not explain?
My paranormal experiences have been more subtle. Mm-hmm. I haven't had like a ghost, come up in front of me, at least I know of.
Yeah.
Although, think about that. Would we necessarily know? Might a ghost just look like another person? Mm-hmm. But one of the weirder things that happened to me was kind of sweet, I think. Back in 2017, I was asked to be part of a paranormal cruise where I would be one of the speakers.
Okay.
And along with us was people like Rosemary Ellen Guiley, the great author. She is fantastic. If anybody's into this stuff, unfortunately she's passed, but her books are top grade. And then Micah Hanks, who's well known for the UFO subject, and I used to do a show with. And anyway, I was one of the speakers, and this one day I was going to be speaking. And we were in a conference room on the cruise ship. This was a day at sea, so basically we're rotating through the different speakers. And we had a break, and I went to go get some coffee because my throat was bothering me. So to do that, you had to walk through the casino of the ship. Now, one of the guys from our group was playing this game where like a claw goes down and it grabs money, right? And, the idea is you win money. I think actually the cruise line wins a lot more money in that case. But anyway, it really made an impression on me because I had an uncle who had passed in 2013 who was like a second dad to me. And he loved to play those games in stores. When you go into a store and they've got that and it's got the stuffed toys. He didn't have any kids, but he would like drop $10 to try to win one of those things. And he loved those games so much so one Christmas I got him a little toy one. So I had a very specific thought of that. I'm like, yeah, John would have loved, well, I kind of told you a little bit there that I shouldn't have. But anyway, he would have loved this. He would have loved this. And he also liked to do a little bit of low stakes gambling, play the lotto, football, pool, that kind of stuff. So he would love this. So anyway, the guy's playing the game. A woman walks up to the thing and she goes, John. And her husband comes over. My uncle's name, as I already kind of slipped and said, was John.
Yeah.
Now, some people would say that's just a coincidence, right? But to me, okay, I had to be walking through the thing while the guy from our group was playing it. I had to think about him very specifically. Wish he were here. This woman had to lose her husband or whoever he was had to be named John, and she had to cup her mouth to her hand to her mouth and say John out loud a couple of times, just as I was walking through to get coffee because I had a sore throat, because I had a cold. So how many different permutations of things had to happen for that message to get to me? And I think that is the case where basically I was thinking of him and he was basically saying right back at you. And I think sometimes our loved ones on the other side, and I don't know if they can do it all the time, because I've heard people say, you know, my so-and-so contacted me but said their time was short or they couldn't talk too long. So I wonder if there's windows of opportunity where our loved ones can move things like chess pieces on a board to get a message to us. I think that's the case. I think that's what happened to me. The skeptics will say it was one big coincidence. I choose not to think that.
I prefer to think that way as well. I think it's just a reassuring way of looking at it rather than something spooky happening to you.
And I think it's like you say, Jim, it has to be the right combination of all these different things happening at once. So it's like there isn't one answer or one explanation, but when things line up just right, somehow these things can happen, and you know, maybe your dead relatives can get a message through right at that exact opportunity. Yeah.
There's another great story. I know we're getting low on time here, but there's another great story that was kind of put out there by a guy by the name of Ralph Emery. He was an old disc jockey, country music disc jockey of all things, at WSM, the big Nashville station, and he went on to kind of national fame. And he told a great ghost story, which is one of my all-time favorites, which I wish were mine, but it's not. There was a famous country singer by the name of Johnny Horton. He, and this would have been late 50s, 1960s, and the guy did songs like North to Alaska, Battle of New Orleans. Those are some of his famous songs. So anyway, he had this friend who was a songwriter who actually went on to write Ring of Fire for Johnny Cash. The guy's name was Merle Kilgore. So anyway, these guys were interested in the paranormal and the supernatural. And they made a pact that if one died before the other, that they would get a message back. But they said, we've got to have like a phrase. And the phrase they came up with was, the drummer was a rummer and couldn't keep the beat. The drummer was a rummer and couldn't keep the beat. So anyway, Johnny Horton gets killed in an accident, a car accident in 1960, tragically. So anyway, several years go by and Kilgore doesn't hear anything from Johnny Horton. So anyway, one night, this guy who is in a psychic group up in New York, he tunes in a radio station to listen to like the Mets game or something. And it's rained out, but it's a country music station. So the disc jockey says, now I've got Johnny Cash's new hit, Ring of Fire, written by my good friend Merle Kilgore. And the psychic's like, Kilgore, Merle Kilgore. That's the guy that has been contacting us about him. There's a guy that's been contacting us about him. So anyway, he figures out how to get a hold of Merle Kilgore. And he says, I'm in a group of people interested in psychic phenomena, and we do seances and things, and we have somebody named Johnny, and we keep hearing from somebody named Johnny who wants to talk to a Merle Kilgore, and I didn't know who you were. And Kilgore thought, this is, whatever. And he said, and the psychic guy said, this Johnny keeps saying something that doesn't make any sense. And Kilgore says, what does he say? What does he come across saying? He says something about the drummer is a rummer and he can't keep the beat.
Wow. That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah. And this guy wrote about this in a book, told it on national television. That's one of the best ghost stories I've ever heard, and I can take absolutely no credit for it.
That's incredible.
Can I ask just real quick? I know we are going to wrap up soon, but ET phenomenon, cryptids, time slips, spirits, ghosts, and I've heard you discuss this on your podcast with other guests, but do you think that there's a connection between all of this paranormal phenomena? And if so, what do you think that connection might be?
I think that there might be a connection in some places. I used to not think that. I thought it was very siloed. But now I think that there might be. I think in some things there might even be a trickster element. But what the connection is, I don't know. I wish I did. It's just amazing to try to figure it out. I don't know that we ever will, but it's great talking with people like you who have a shared interest and we want to figure it out.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's why we do it. That's why you've been doing it all.
Trying to figure it out.
Exactly. So how did you choose the stories for your latest book? Was it just the ones that piqued your interest, or was there a particular, rhythm to it?
Basically, it is that we take a 2-year period and we just kind of whittle it down and find what we think the most compelling stories are. And I think that's, and that's why the mix is what it is. We just try to find the most unique and most interesting stories over a 2-year period and do a light rewrite. We don't add any facts. If it's a red car in the original story, it's a red car in this. And that's basically it. So we just try to do that and do the best job of reflecting the voice and what our storytellers have told us.
Okay. Well, Jim, for our listeners who want to learn more about you, which again, you're everywhere. You are in every podcast portal. But let them know where they can, check you out and get your book.
Sure.
Or anything else.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you guys. You have all been so nice. You've been I've been on a lot of podcasts, and you guys have been some of the nicest people I've got to meet. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
You can find Jim Harold's Campfire and the Paranormal Podcast on all your favorite podcast apps, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. You can also find it at jimharold.com. You can find the book True Ghost Stories, Jim Harold's Campfire Volume 6 on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, and also at jimharold.com. And thank you all so much, and stay spooky.